guys. Thank you for coming. As you guys know, it's our last Women in Leadership Speaker Series, so for you guys that have been around since September hanging out with us, I hope you guys have seen a culmination of female, different types of leadership on campus. And if you're just joining us today, you've got an incredible speaker, and I'm excited to hear what Professor Dang-Williams is going to share with you guys.
Please feel free to interrupt me or at any time if you have questions or if you can't hear me, because when I speak kind of casually, my voice isn't projected as much as if I were teaching. I started here at Webster this past July, so July 1st, 2011. Yes, 2011 was my first day at Webster. Prior to coming to Webster, I was the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences at St. Louis Community College at the Forest Park campus. So I was there for 6 years, and prior to that, I was a department chair of the Communications and Social Sciences Department at Rankin Technical College for 9 years. And so that's been kind of my professional history. When Lauren contacted me and asked me about doing this, I was very excited to meet with, well, you guys as the new young leaders, but also the Webster students, to meet you, to hear about you. And when Lauren asked me about what to talk about, I asked her what should I talk about. So I kind of threw it back at her, and so we threw some things around, and we talked about specifically my story in terms of being a refugee family coming to the United States in 1975, and then the other theme that I want to talk about, and if something else comes up, that's fine, is balancing the work and the home and the family and so forth, because as our generation changes, we are becoming more of the sandwich generation, where we're taking care of our kids but also our parents, and caring for our parents as well, and that's pretty tough. So if you have any questions, please feel free to jump in. My family came to the United States in 1975 after Saigon fell. We are from Vietnam. My parents decided to sign up on a list to become sponsored, and so families basically had to be sponsored to be able to come to the United States. My parents were in their early 40s. There were 4 of us. My oldest sister was 9 at the time. I was 4, my brother's 3, I have a sister who was 2, and my mom was pregnant with my youngest sister. So if you can imagine a woman in her early 40s being pregnant, but also having 4 kids to take this journey. I actually brought my mom's photo album. We have many, but this is the one that has the newspaper clippings of when we first came to the United States, and specifically St. Louis. So you can pass this around. Our family was sponsored by a church in Overland here in St. Louis. It's in the Rittner School District, and I say that because there's a reason why that means so much to me. I'll tell you about it in a little bit. It was Stephen Memorial United Methodist Church that sponsored our family to come to St. Louis. We went through Wake Island, which is where my sister was born. So she was an automatic U.S. citizen because she was born there. And then we were processed through Fort Chaffee in Arkansas. And that's where we learned of our assignment of being here in St. Louis. And so the church was responsible in terms of sponsoring us, responsible for making sure we had housing, helping my father and mother find jobs, helping with the English, and the whole gambit. And I tell many people, I didn't learn English from my parents. I learned it from the church, and I learned it from Sesame Street and the TV programs. In the home, in growing up, we were not allowed to speak English. Well, first because my parents didn't understand it, but secondly because they wanted us to keep the language, to learn the language, and it was important for them that we learn our culture and embraced our culture. And of course, in growing up, we didn't always embrace it like they wanted us to embrace it, but I think in the long run, we all did. It was difficult for my parents, because if you can imagine being in your 40s, because I'm in my early 40s now, and I think, wow, they learned a whole new language. They didn't know English. They learned about how to make a livelihood, how to survive, basically, out of necessity. I don't know that I could have done that. I personally, in hindsight, and thinking about this, I can't imagine running or being forced out of a country, fleeing with 4 kids, pregnant with 1, getting onto a ship that really comfortably holds 35, and there were 400 of us. My father was the captain of the ship. It was a cargo ship, and he knew how to navigate because he was a ship's captain, but he taught himself how to navigate by reading the stars. He was a mathematics instructor in Vietnam. He saved a lot of lives. And so from time to time, and not as much anymore, but prior to recent times, I would hear things from my dad and my mom talking, and they would talk about, well, so-and-so contacted us, and when we were younger, it was so-and-so, it now lives in Virginia, so-and-so now lives here, and these are the people who were on the ship. And so through all that, my parents really prioritized family first and education as second. Education was non-negotiable, and being a part of the family, contributing to the family, was also non-negotiable. So in talking to some students, because I'm usually asked this in my class and then also in people that I meet, they say, well, you know, it's that Asian stereotype. You guys, you're smarter for some reason. You're just, Asians are smarter, Asians are the nerds, Asians go into computer science, Asians this and that, and they're smarter in math. And I've come to learn that it's an education process where I have to let people know Asians are not smarter. Their brains aren't wired differently. They don't have extra nodules that others don't have. It's not that way at all. It's the socialization process. It's when they are raised, when we were raised, having a good education and being good in school and getting the good grades was non-negotiable. There was no compromise. One significant thing that my father did, so let me backtrack a little bit. My mom and dad always had at least 1 full-time job. But in most cases, as far back as I can remember until they retired, they had 1.5 jobs, or 2 jobs, or 1 full-time job and 2 part-time jobs. My mom retired as a lab technician at Washington University School of Medicine. She worked in the neurology lab, and her job was, I could not do her job. It was so mundane for me because I would have to go with her sometimes, and she did it on Saturdays and at night because she had a wonderful boss who sometimes let her go home to take care of us if one of us was sick at home, get us all taken care of, then go back to work to finish her job. Her doctor studied cancer, brain cancer. So she had frozen brains, either rat brains or whatever, with tumors, and she had to slice the brains and mount them on the slides and put the coloring in it, and she created the slides for the doctors to do the research and the medical students. And that took such care to slice those brains so carefully. And I remember that one time my mom was so tired, so I went with her because she was so tired. And so she went to the bathroom, so I thought, I'll just slice a brain. But, you know, it's in a thing, and you just, you know, you spin it, but you have to spin that wheel just right so that the brain could be sliced at the right thickness. I was spinning. And so I ruined a brain because it wasn't thin enough, and because you have to do it quite evenly enough. This was before, it's more digitized now, and it's more mechanical now. And so then she apologized to her boss, but I too had to apologize. So that humbled me a little bit, but it also humbled me more to know, look what my mom does so that we can put food on the table. That was her full-time job. Part-time, she would work in some of the Chinese restaurants to cut onions. And she was paid cash. But I remember running in to get my mom because her shift was over, and her eyes were just filled with tears because she's cutting onions for the restaurant. And so these are the things that they had to do. My father, when we first came to the U.S., he met with people at the church and I call them the church elders, because that's kind of the translation into Vietnamese, is that they're very revered for their age, but also they took care of us. My father asked me, well, what should I do? I want to teach math like I did in Vietnam. Well, here in the U.S., they don't acknowledge the degrees that are earned overseas, and at that time it was even less than now. And so the church elders, they said, no, teachers here in the U.S. don't make that much money, so it really wouldn't be worth you going back to school to earn the American degree to be able to teach. My father wanted to teach at the college level. And so they told him at the time, and I think this is right, at the time in the 70s, people could make more in industry because of union wages and so forth. So they helped him decide what to do, and so he went to school to learn how to fix air conditioners. And so that was my father's profession, was fixing air conditioners. So his full-time job was working for a company, and his part-time job was getting side jobs in fixing air conditioners. And that's, when he retired, that's what he did. The unique aspect of my family is that they did push us hard to maintain that Vietnamese culture, that the language. Yes, we speak Vietnamese, but I will tell you, I butcher the language. Because someone asked me, what grade level are you comfortable to? And I said, probably first grade in speaking Vietnamese, but it's formal Vietnamese, because my parents only spoke formal Vietnamese to us. We were exposed to Vietnamese kids our age, but not that many, because we were one of the first families to come here to St. Louis. We went to the Buddhist temple on the weekends and played with other kids and other families, but we were all learning English at the same time. So we were, kind of that Spanglish, Spanish English. We were doing a Vietnamese English mix, and we still kind of do that. And so when I recently had a letter from my mom in Vietnamese. It took me 3 darn days to translate that letter, because I had to go get the Vietnamese English dictionary, and I wrote the words down and I could figure it out, and I got the context, but there were still some words that I wasn't quite sure, and so it took me a while to understand that. In my parents, their motivation for us is that they want, it's what we want for all our kids. We want our kids to be more successful than us, but in their mindset, we want our kids to survive, because that's why they left Vietnam. They left because of the fear for our lives, not necessarily theirs, but ours. And so my oldest sister is 5 years older than I am. I'm the second oldest of 5. But after me, we're kind of stair-stepped, a year apart, except our youngest is 2 years. And so in the pictures, you'll see that there are 4 of us in quite a few of the pictures. And then my oldest sister, because she's 5 years older, she was already out of high school or out of elementary school and so forth. When my father was told by her teacher that she was struggling in math in middle school, so that was around 6th grade, that caused him so much angst, because he's a math teacher. So, and I remember these lectures and discussions. You guys, okay, we don't know the language, so I can't really help you with reading, with writing, with English, with history even. But you're going to know math, and you're going to know the sciences, and you're going to know it very well. So the concession made by my parents, even though it really wasn't made, was that if we had B's, we could get it in writing and English and social studies, but we will make A's in math and the sciences. My sister was in 6th grade struggling. And my father decided, and mind you, he had a full-time job. He also went at that time, to night school at Washington University. And he didn't have to, because he was fixing air conditioners. He didn't need a degree to fix air conditioners, but in his mind, it was so important for us to see him go to school, and so important for him to get that degree, that he did this. He ended up getting a general education degree with some math. From Washington University, a bachelor's degree, and he was 50-something. And so if you think about learning an entire new language, and it was, at the time, of course, we didn't appreciate it because we were too young, but in looking at it now, that was a lot. So my sister's struggling. My dad's working full-time, taking some classes at night. He decides, I cannot have my oldest child struggle in math because it'll affect the youngest children. Because everything is, that oldest child has a hard life, I'll tell you. My sister had a hard life because she was the role model. She was kind of the benchmark. And so my dad converted our basement playroom into a classroom. And my husband has seen it, and he didn't believe me at first, but he's seen it. He came home one day with a piece of plywood, the great big pieces, black paint, and buckets of chalk. He painted the plywood black, mounted it to the wall, put some tables and chairs in the room, and we had math class. So our playroom, and there were other rooms in the house that we could play in, but that room that was our playroom was now our classroom, because my dad started to really, really teach us. But mind you, remember, there's that 5-year difference. So my sister is in the 6th grade, going into the 7th grade. With a 5-year difference, I'm in the 2nd grade. And if, let's say, 2nd grade, my brother's in the 1st grade, my younger sister's in kindergarten, and then I have a younger sister who was 2 or 3. My sister goes into the 8th grade, and that's when, I think at the time, algebra is taught. So she's learning algebra in the 8th grade. I'm learning it in the 3rd grade. My brother's learning it in the 2nd grade. My younger sister's learning it in the 1st grade, and I have a youngest sister who wasn't even in preschool yet, picking it up. My father's philosophy and belief is that this you can control all the time. And until you push to get to that potential, you never know. He pushed us. And to this darn day, I can tell you algebraic equations. I can't get them out of my head. So if you say parentheses x plus y and you put that little square there, I can tell you what it is. It's x squared plus 2ab plus b squared, or plus y squared. We did it by a and b. I could give it to you to the cube too. For not just x plus y, but I could do x minus y to the square and the cube. My father decided that, well, my children, they have to learn this because this is the root and this is the foundation of math, of logic, of intelligence, of being perceived as being intelligent. So we had the math lessons, and when I tell you they're lessons, they're lessons. He taught us how to do it. He bought stacks and stacks of paper we had to write neatly, because part of doing math well is that everything has to align. If you can't read it, if it's not aligned, you're not going to have a successful math problem or a successful equation. I still think like that. I can't help it. So I was fighting him. We were fighting him. So he decided, you guys can't win. So he made all these copies of the mathematic formulas, and he taped it to our ceiling. So it was the first thing we saw when we woke up, and it was the last thing we saw before closing our eyes. He taped it in the bathroom so that if we happened to be on the toilet, there it was. So even passively, we couldn't help it. We couldn't help it but learn those equations. And in hindsight, yes, he's right. Now, I have not done that to my kids yet. But I thought about it. But it was to that degree. And, we, back in the day, in the 70s, they didn't really have copy machines like they do now with scanners. So we had carbon paper. Have you guys, yeah, you put that nasty black, blue paper between 2 pieces of paper and you write and it makes copies. Well, we had a whole stack of carbon paper because my dad would give us math problems to do when we came home from school while he was still at work. And the expectation was that we needed to do our math homework for him prior to him coming home. Over the weekends, we had our math problems to do, and we had formal math lessons. In the summertime, we had math lessons, and at that time then, my parents owned a copy machine, and those were not cheap. And I remember having friends over, and they were just kind of laughing. Why do you guys own a copy machine? Do you have a family business here? I was like, no. It's for our math habits. And it was comical now, but weird to our friends at the time. And so as we progressed, math was easy. I tested out of math in college. My in high school, I took math in the 0 hour because the calculus, the more advanced courses were the smaller courses, and they put it in a 0 hour. I took it, but I honestly, I don't know about saying this on tape, but I slept in class because it was easy. It wasn't because I had already learned it, and I had learned it so well that, okay, I'll just do it and turn it in. Where it caused me problems from my experience is if I knew a way of doing something that my teacher was not familiar with that technique, or it was a technique that she or he didn't like. And I'll give you one example. And I didn't mean to cause such heartache for this teacher, but I couldn't understand what was going on at the time. I do now, but at the time I didn't. So we were solving algebraic equations. And so it's like x plus y equals 4, 3x plus 2y equals 9, solve for x, solve for y. And the American way, and this is the way that my father words it, the American way is that you solve for x first, and then you substitute in, and then you solve for y, and then you plug it back in to make sure it fits. So I think there are a total of 8 lines of work. The way that I was first taught, and I still like, and I taught it to my son in high school, is matrices. You set up the matrices to solve for x and to solve for y. And it's a little more foolproof because you can backtrack too and plug it in and see if it works. So when I was learning how to solve for x and y in school, I used matrices. The teacher gave me an F because I didn't use the substitution formula. And I remember arguing and saying, but that's the right answer. The directions say, show your work. I showed my work. Here's the answer. But Thao, you didn't do it the way that we learned it. And I said, okay, I'll do it the way that we learned it, but I want to use this other way. So then we just went round and round. And I would go home and tell my parents, like, Thao, you have to do what the teacher says. And I remember so clearly saying, but that way is inferior. Why would they teach kids that way? Why would my friends learn that way when this way was so much better and so much easier? But my parents were always supportive of the teachers. Regardless of what happened, we always had to listen to the teachers as a life lesson. So I didn't mean to cause this teacher so much heartache, but I know that I did. And it occurred to me years later when she had my youngest sister. She wasn't familiar with matrices. She might have learned it in college, but it wasn't her way. It wasn't something that she practiced so regularly that she could have done it. We knew how to do it so well. I can't do it now, but I used to be, I could do it in my head. I could see the matrices in my head and I could plug the formulas in so that we got to the point where we could do it for 3 unknowns. So x plus y plus z, and we could do it in our heads. And that's because of the training, I say, what we went through with my father. And eventually, we all became older, and I think he just got tired. But also, his goal was to take us through high school, the highest math in high school. We knew all along we were expected to take the higher math classes, the higher science classes. And in growing up, for me, it was fine to take it because it wasn't hard. It wasn't seen as difficult to me. It was, it's just plug and chug. You just figure out what the unknowns are. You kind of write it out, what you're looking for neatly, and then you just plug it in because there's always a formula. And so it's still that way for me. But I can see, though, in what my son is going through, I have 4 kids, and he's in high school. He comes home, he struggles, and I have to bite my tongue. I do, and say, this is inferior. This method that you're learning is inferior. But I won't tell him that. I just say, I'm just going to teach you another way to show you so that you can cross-check your answer. So I don't want him to think that I'm usurping the teacher and that he doesn't have to learn what the teacher teaches him, which he does. I'm just showing him another way to kind of do a checks and balance. And for further down the road, I want to show him so that when he takes those Scantron tests for college, he'll be able to choose either way. so that he doesn't have to show it to that degree. And so around high school, when I entered high school and got to that class, my father kind of quit teaching us math. And so, but there's a 4-year difference between me and my youngest sister. If I was prepared for those math and science classes, she was beyond prepared. My father kept our math papers, and he was very, very, he was right at the time to make sure that we wrote very neatly. We used to have to write in graph paper and stay in the boxes, but because she was so young, she got to use non-graph paper because her numbers were so much bigger, but they aligned. And so you might want to, you might say, well, what did all this do? What it did for me, though, I was my father and mother's most rebellious child. I rebelled against math. I said, I'm never taking math, and I'll never have anything to do with math or science because I didn't like it forced on me. I can do it, and I've shown you that I can do it, but I won't. And so when I went to college, I was still rebellious. I majored in communications. Now it's called political science, but at the time it was government. And I was going to do a triple major in the classics, but I finished a semester early and didn't finish that major. I tested out of the math classes. The science classes were, I don't think I got an A in my science class in college because I learned to party. It's our first time away from home. And so, but it was okay. My oldest sister is a dental hygienist. My brother went to Washington University, double majored in computer science and engineering. He is a project manager for HP. My sister, who's a year younger than him, is a chiropractor and an herbologist and acupuncturist. And she actually was thinking about going to medical school, but got into the whole holistic medicine thing, and so she changed her path. And my youngest sister, the one who knew all this way back when, she was pre-med. She went to, my 3 younger siblings went to WashU. She was pre-med, but decided that she didn't want to spend all that time. She was accepted and didn't want to spend all that time in medical school, so switched to accounting. So she is a CPA. My 2 youngest sisters were valedictorians. My brother was salutatorian, and I was somewhere in the top 10 because I purposefully knew that if I didn't turn in some assignments, I wouldn't have straight A's, so I couldn't be valedictorian or salutatorian, so I did that to rebel against my parents. I know it's going to come back and haunt me. I just know it with my kids. But it's not because Asians are smarter. It's a different socialization process. When my friends went out and they invited me to go out, sometimes I couldn't go because I had to do math class. That was non-negotiable. That wasn't, and so did I lose some friends? Yeah, because they thought I was kind of being snobby and not wanting to go with them. But when I explained, I said, oh, no, I have to do math class. They thought it was a lie, that I was just making something up because what do you mean you have to do math class? But until, they came over and they saw, and I found out much later during my 20-year high school reunion, some of those friends, and I didn't know this, they told me they were kind of jealous and envious because had they had that kind of preparation, maybe school wouldn't have been as hard for them. And I said, I've never thought of that. I've never thought of it that way before. And so that's kind of how we were raised. And we were raised very traditionally. My father and mother are, they're Vietnamese. They were raised as, my father is the man of the house. My mom, very strong-willed female, but the Vietnamese culture is not as, I want to say, as extreme in being patriarchal like the other collective cultures. It's more, if there was a Vietnamese, or if there was an Asian culture that seemed to be a little more equal, it would be the Vietnamese culture. And I've studied the Vietnamese culture and the refugees and the first wave and the second wave and the third wave. I was part of the first wave. And the roles of the parents, the mom and the dad, and we have found that, I have found in interviews and so forth, and literature, that in coming to the U.S., it was okay for the man of the house not to be the man of the house all the time, and out of necessity, the wife had to go to work. And it wasn't something that was humiliating, it was just something that had to be done. And actually, I was rereading some of those articles. There's an article in there from it used to be the St. Louis Globe, and they were interviewing my mom. And she said something in there like, in Vietnam, the man is number one. Here, somebody told me when we were at the camp in Fort Chaffee that the woman is number one. So I'm number one. And so, I mean, it's in the it's in the article. And in thinking back about my parents, it was a two-parent decision of what we did, where we went, what activities we were involved in. It was never really just my dad saying, this is my way and this is the way it's going to be, and period. And so it's much more equal. And even my dad had a stroke in 2006, so even prior to 2006, before his stroke, it was still kind of like that. The other thing I want to share with you is my dad and mom have put into us such a strong sense of giving back to the community that is non-negotiable. So anytime that we are asked for help, especially by another Vietnamese person or even others, we don't really have the right to say no unless it's so extreme or just so way out there. And the example I have for you is in us being one of the first, and some have told me we were the first family to be here in St. Louis. In the Vietnamese community, many families know us, and actually the parents go to my parents for advice on how do you raise kids, how did you keep it, how did you help your kids retain the Vietnamese culture, the Vietnamese tradition, and so forth. And so I remember in growing up, so because my parents wanted all of us to do well in math and science, my forte was English. And so I read everything that I could read, and I remember when I got in trouble, my dad would take my books away from me. Because he didn't, English was important, but math was more important. And so when it came to people in the Vietnamese community and helping them, I was the one to help many of them read their documents, their papers, to fill out forms. And I never knew who I was helping, how they knew my parents. I remember going to the temple with my parents. All of us would go, but I would go into the adult room sometimes, and I would just sit at a table, and I'm just sitting there. I said, I don't even know what I'm doing here. And my dad goes, just wait. And so here they come with papers that they've received in the mail or something they needed to fill out, and I would just read and explain. And that's what I did quite a bit of. If you think back to 9/11, Homeland Security was formed, and all these new regulations and rules came out. There's a significant population of employees at the airport who are Vietnamese. And so everyone kind of had to be cleared again, and so there was papers that needed to be filled out. When that came out, I was working at Rankin Technical College at the time. And the first time it happened, I was thrown off a bit. My husband was thrown off a whole lot. But I would come home from work. There were people in my driveway waiting for me to come home. I'm married with children at this time, and they had their papers. And my mom and dad didn't tell me that they had put on a bulletin board at the temple, if you need help with your paperwork, here's when she'll be home from work, just show up. And so for almost up to a year, I felt I was obligated to go home after work by a certain time, the time that was posted on the bulletin board, to help anyone who showed up. We helped hundreds of people. And I say we because I dragged my husband in, but it didn't quite work out as well because he couldn't understand, of course he couldn't understand the language. Here are some of the problems that I learned from that. And in hindsight, I should have done a whole study. I should have done an academic study of this process. Many of them didn't know what they reported as their birthday. Because in coming to the U.S., some people look younger than what they actually are. So they report a younger birth year so they can work longer to support their family. Many of them didn't have the right identifications. They had it at one time before they were hired, but then it was lost, and then they couldn't remember what was the birth date on the identification. So it was a lot of that. So that was kind of the first wave of helping. The second time that my parents put me out there, and this is in my more recent past, was to go to Vietnamese functions where there were more young people to help them with paperwork to get into college. The FAFSA forms, the college admissions requirements, proofreading, statements of purposes, and it got to the point where the parents were kind of pressuring me, why don't you just write it? I said, I can't write it, because when your daughter or son is interviewed or when they start school, they're going to know, based on their language skills, that they didn't write this, and you would be embarrassed. That's the only way I could get through to them, because their child represents the family, so you would be embarrassed if I wrote this. Because at first when I said no, I was upsetting so many people, they were calling my parents. I'm a grown woman. They're calling my parents, complaining that I was refusing to help. I wasn't refusing to help, I was saying that I couldn't write it. I would be happy to proofread it, but I couldn't write it. And so there's a big difference in all this. So all this is coming through, and in the early 80s though, so my father kind of stopped tutoring us. He started to tutor Vietnamese young people in the community, and word got out. And so he had his full-time job, and the Vietnamese community said, please do not, don't go fix air conditioners on the weekend, tutor my son, tutor my daughter, we will help support the family. And my father goes, no, I can't take money for helping your child. And they said, but we can't have you working a second job if we need you more to tutor. And so my father was paid a little, $5 an hour, like that, but groups and groups of Vietnamese young people. If you were to pull up from the newspapers from St. Louis Public School, but also from math competitions statewide, from 1980 to 94, you're going to see boom, 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 top 10, top 15, and all these Vietnamese names. They were my father's students, and they competed, and they won, and then the Vietnamese community would have these huge celebrations for the young people, and when my father would walk in, to me he's my dad, he's the one who made me learn math. They would have a celebration day, and his title in the Vietnamese community is Thai Bing. His name is Bing. Thai means master. And that's how people know him. They don't know my name. They know me as Master Bing's daughter. I went to Webster, not Webster Walk, but the restaurant around the corner from Ben Franklin. It's a Vietnamese Chinese restaurant. It's owned by Vietnamese people. And I walked in, and they're like, how's your dad? I said, what? Aren't you Tai Bing's daughter? I was like, I am. How do you know? Oh, we all watch you. We know. We have your picture up at the temple. We have your pictures here. We have copies of your report cards from when we were all the way up. I said, oh, can you tell me who you are so I can, go back to my parents to give greetings? And it was that case. I mean, they watch out for all of us. And I told them I'm here at Webster now. They said, great. We have some Vietnamese students who will be here, and they'll be here at this time. Can you come by? I said, okay. So I gave them a card, and I said, just call me, I'll come. And so they're starting to gather them to see if we have a little cohort over here, just so that I can talk to them and say, look, because, the new generation, they're not like us. They're more free. They are less bound by tradition, which goes with any culture that immigrates, that the younger generations kind of lose more of a piece of the culture and so forth. But my father is very, very revered. When he had his stroke, it got out to the community, so when he was released from the rehabilitation center, all these people came to visit, and I hadn't seen them in a very long time, but the food that they brought, I can't even put it into words. It's a little overwhelming for me how much my father is revered and loved. but it's also overwhelming because he set that bar really, really high. And so he is suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's because of his stroke. And so he has his, ins and outs, on and off days. And I remember, though, prior to him having his stroke, he would say, "Thao, what is your community service? What are you going to do?" And I said, I work. I have a family, and I help people when they come to the door. But what do you mean? He goes, "You have to give back. You have a big mouth, and so you need to find a way to use your mouth to give back." And so 8 years ago, I ran for the Board of Trustees for Board of Education for the Rittner School. We moved back to the Rittner District. I went to Monmouth College in Monmouth, Illinois, met my husband, and moved back to Overland to be close to my parents to help them. And so I ran. I didn't win because I really didn't do anything. I just ran. I just thought, I'll just run. I'll just run. But recently, this past election on April 3rd, I ran again, and I did win. And so, but I ran. I mean, we got out there. The kids got out there, and so when I told my dad in one of his lucid moments, he said, "Now, what else are you going to do?" I've been married actually 19 years. I married my college sweetheart. I have 4 kids, 3 sons and a daughter, and the 3 oldest are boys, 17, 12, and 9, and my daughter is 5. And so we live in Overland, in the Rittner School District. I graduated from Rittner. My husband is super tall. He's 6'8". I'm not. I'm only 5 feet tall. And so this has been an experience for him too. Some things that seem very normal to me that seem like nothing, it's huge for him. And I know that it's huge because he gets on the phone to call his brother or somebody to say that he couldn't believe what just happened, and that the one day with the line of people, he said, "Thao, it's like, we're at the airport and all these people are trying to get through." I said, "No, they just need help, and so please give them water, we'll just bring them in." And so and he tried to help, but the language, and he did scare them because he was so tall. And so in raising our kids, though, we tried to do the blend because he was very into sports. He was the youngest of 8, 5 older sisters, 2 older brothers, all sports people. Sports was just it, which is a bit much for me. And his parents had a trophy room. C's were okay. Well, then as long as you graduate from high school, it's okay. And so meeting me and then our discussions, it's been hard. It's been different. But he sees the grades now. He values it. He's very supportive of our kids, but there's sometimes that I have to take that hard line, and he just has to walk away because it's so different than the way that he was raised. We have a 17-year-old son who loves sports. I discovered that he wasn't turning in assignments, so it wasn't from lack of intellect or that he didn't get it. He just wasn't turning his assignments in, so I told her, "I'm going to pull you off the team." And it was my husband, "Thao, this is high school." He made the team. "You can't pull him off a team in the middle of the season. Watch me." Thao. And so we had to really, I had to really get in there to talk to our son because he didn't think I'd do it. I ended up not doing it because my friends at Forest Park, they're like, "Thao, please. This will stay with him his whole life. And just like you talk about your parents, he's going to talk about you pulling him off the team and how he was traumatized." But so now the expectations have been set. And for me, and I didn't realize it until having these conversations with more people, oh my God, I've turned into my parents because he has to set the bar for his younger siblings. What his expectations are going to be their expectations. And it freaks me out a little bit that I've turned into my mom and dad, but it's okay. but it still freaks me out. Because I rebelled so much against them. And so, do you guys have any questions? I don't know.
I know you guys might have class at 1, but this has been really, really engaging. I've kind of been like just listening without even thinking about what questions. Do you guys have any, like 1 or 2 questions, and then I'll let you guys get out of here for class, if you have them.
I would like to end on one
course.
one thing. My parents, in terms of being raised and how it's affected my work life, and this is the part that I want you to carry with you. One of the exercises, and my husband calls it brainwashing, but it was effective, is that we would stand in front of the mirror, and my parents would be right next to us, right behind me. And they're like, "What do you see?" And I was like, "Well, you can see what I see." I was trying to be, I see me, I see you, I see Dad. And they said, that's what you should see and think about every time you make a decision that impacts anything that you do. Impacting another person's life, impacting a person's livelihood, impacting your livelihood. It's not just you, you represent us. So many people, I don't know if it's a compliment or not, they've told me that I'm fearless about certain things. And I just see it as, if this is the policy, we follow the policy. If this is the prescribed procedure, we follow the procedure. This is the right thing to do. And they said, well, Thao, you just move forward. And I said, because it's the right thing to do. In my former position in a public institution, I had to deal with a lot of grievances and lawsuits. But I've made it through them all because I followed the policy and the procedure. And in the workplace, that is very important, but it also shows integrity. I am fearful, and one thing I'm most fearful of, and I carry this with me a lot, is that I embarrass my family. I do something that embarrasses my family, even to this day, embarrassing my parents, and in the workplace here, embarrassing my boss, my dean. And and for many people, they're just kind of surprised because they say, well, no, Thao, you've been in the U.S. long enough to know it's about the individual. And I said, it is, but it's not. Because if I see myself as making a decision or responding to someone, I have to do it so that it doesn't have a negative impact down the road. Have I made mistakes? Oh, absolutely. And I've gone back and I've stated, this is why I did this. It was not out of malice, but I wasn't thinking or I reacted too quickly. But here, when I make decisions, and the dean jokes with me quite a bit that I think things through. I want to hear all the steps and all the details and so forth. And my biggest concern is embarrassing. Either embarrassing, the university, my boss, my friends, and my colleagues. But that's the way that I was raised. And so.
Thank you so much.